Good evening. My name is Allison Kaplan. I'm Director of Education for the National First Ladies Library, located at the National First Ladies Historic Site in Canton, Ohio. I'm really excited to have you all here this evening. And before we get started for this program, I want to tell you about some of our upcoming programs that you might have seen flying by really fast on the PowerPoint. I want to mention, if you are local to us or you are still taking advantage of summer travel, the National First Ladies Historic Site, open in partnership with the National Park Service, our partners, is hosting an exhibition curated by the National First Ladies Library related to our subject tonight, Nancy Reagan. And it's a really amazing exhibition. It has original clothing on loan to us from the Reagan Library and the Reagan Ranch. So you can experience Nancy firsthand, learn about her history and background, her start in Hollywood, the way that she brought that Hollywood to the White House. It connects to other First Ladies and their causes as it explores Just Say No, some of the trials and tribulations of the Reagan administration, from the AIDS epidemic to Nancy dealing with breast cancer, to her husband being nearly assassinated and dealing with Alzheimer's at the end of his life. So it's a really great show. It's really moving and very interesting exploration of the 1980s. So if you enjoy what you see tonight and you are close by, please come and check that exhibition out. We are really proud of it and really excited to share it. I want to mention some other upcoming programs. Some of you might have been with us for some of our regular goings on. We have coming up, First Ladies Night is returning. We are doing some cross-stitching inspired by Edith Roosevelt with one of our amazing volunteers who is a historian exploring First Ladies crafts. And we're really excited about that. We're going to be sharing some directions before. So please, if you're interested, log on to our Eventbrite, sign up, and we will send you in the next week or two directions, supplies that you will need. So you'll be able to connect with us, and we'll form a mini sewing circle as we learn about some of Edith Roosevelt's really cool sewing projects, and hopefully feature some from Sagamore Hills. So we're very excited about that. Our film series, we're connecting with our partners at Stark Library down the street from us. And we are we've just wrapped up our Nancy Reagan film exploration. We had some really great conversations about Nancy as an actress. And we are again, partnering with the library to offer free film access. So if you're in Ohio, you can sign up for a library card online through Stark and access the film right away. If you're outside of Ohio, you can sign up online, and we send you a link about a week before. We are showing Women in Motion. We're doing a whole series of women and firsts. So women who are first in their fields, from Geraldine Ferraro to women in the space program to women doctors. And we're starting with Women in Motion. We're screening in our homes, Women in Motion, starring Nichelle Norris of Star Trek fame, and exploring how she helped kick off a movement of women and women of color in the space industry. We're going to meet up and discuss it on August 16th. I cannot wait. And we may have a special guest joining us from NASA. So stay tuned for more details. Our curator talk is going to explore Eleanor Roosevelt and a My Day column. So in that program, we look at an object or artifact or letter in the National First Ladies Library collection up close. It's a really fun program. And again, we have a book club discussion, and we're going to be talking about Daughters of Yalta. And that was a member pick, a really great one, August 22nd at 6 p.m. And if you have children and you're local, or you have children or grandchildren and you're tuning in from far away, you can connect with us in person this weekend for our Fun with Flotus drop-in day in First Ladies Park. We're celebrating the energy of the sun. We didn't have any sun this past week, so we're meeting up in person this weekend for our rain date and going to be doing some fun activities inspired by First Ladies and sunshine. And then we have a backyard kit, 3 kits available for the summer, inspired by Dolly Madison, Rosalind Carter, and one more that is on the way, inspired by First Lady Hoover. So we're really excited about that. And then we're hoping that you will join us in the fall for some of our lectures. So we'll have the return of our lecture series, and the first one will be September 7th, and we will be hosting the curator of the Winterthur exhibition about Jacqueline Kennedy and the DuPonts and the relationship and the restoration of the White House. So we're very excited about that. That's just a little bit of what's coming up. As always, if you are having problems connecting or hearing me or seeing Sarah, please let me know in the chat. I'm going to be here to talk to you. I'm going to throw some links at you related to our upcoming programs, or if you have questions for Sarah, again, you can put them there. But we are so excited to have Sarah Morgan again with us here this evening from the Instagram account, Cooking with the First Ladies. And this evening, we are going to be exploring Nancy Reagan. So I want to welcome Sarah and turn things over to her. And again, if you signed up for this program via Eventbrite, check your email for those recipe cards, and we will get you a link after the close of the program as well, just to follow up. So I'm going to throw things over to Sarah and enjoy.
All right, well, hey y'all, again, I'm Sarah, and welcome to Cooking with the First Ladies live program for, again, the National First Ladies Library. So tonight we're, of course, going to be talking about Nancy Reagan, who was just a complete force to be reckoned with, who not only really crossed political boundaries for her beliefs, but also connected with women in kind of a way in which they actually listened to her. She was a symbol of really conflicting beliefs between astrology and conservatism. Either way, in addition to the CNN documentary, the National First Ladies Library, the Showtime documentary, The Reagans, her biography, My Turn, as well as her book, I Love You, Ronnie, and the book by Joan Quigley about her years as the White House astrologer, and some current news articles is where I kind of got all of my research for this evening. But Nancy, she was a powerhouse of the White House in more ways than one. So we'll learn a little bit more about her, but also stay tuned to learn how to cook onion wine soup, President Reagan's favorite dish, which was a macaroni and cheese, their Baja, California chicken, which was served along two-tone rice, and finally, Nancy's monkey bread. So following, I'll of course, again, leave some time for some questions in the chat. But first, as always, we're going to start this evening with a couple cocktails. The first cocktail that we're going to make is an orange blossom, which is actually a classic Prohibition era cocktail, but was a favorite of former President Reagan's. So what we're going to do for this is we're going to take 1 ounce of vodka, and actually a little less in Reagan's case. He would have used just a little less. We're going to take that and put that in there. And then I need to get some ice. All right. And then you're going to add 2 ounces of fresh orange juice and 1 ounce of sweet vermouth. And we're just gonna stir that a little bit. And there you have it, a very simple orange blossom, which then we're going to garnish with an orange slice. So there's our first cocktail. Our next cocktail is also inspired by Ronnie. Reagan stayed at the Mission Inn Hotel and Spa in Riverside, California for part of their honeymoon. And so the inn created the jelly bean cocktail in honor of them. So Reagan was well known for his love of jelly beans. Reagan loved jelly beans so much, he had a standard order for 306,070 jelly beans to be distributed throughout the White House and other federal buildings. Also, when Ronnie would travel, even as president, he did pack himself, but Nancy would slip little notes as well as jelly beans into his suitcase. So to make our jelly bean cocktail, you're normally going to want to have a shaker. I don't have one, so we're just going to stir. But we are going to put in 2 ounces of sour apple schnapps. And 1 ounce of peach schnapps. And finally, 1 ounce of grenadine. And we're also going to add just a little bit of ice to this one as well. And then normally you would shake it, but this evening we're going to stir it. And then we are just going to strain that into a martini glass. And the most fun part about this cocktail is that you can garnish it with jelly beans and some jelly beans on your plate. So let me get this out of the way really quick so we have room for our cooking later. Okay. I'm going to step over. I'm going to share a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation, as always, about Nancy, and then we'll get back to the cooking. So let me pop over to my computer. Oops, sorry, technical difficulties. Okay, so Nancy Reagan was First Lady from 1981 to 1989, the decade of big everything from phones to hair to women's shoulder pads. The decade was known not only as the new age, but also the excellent 80s and the moderate decade, which referred to Reagan's presidency specifically because of the return of conservatism. The pop culture of the 1980s was almost either iconic in regards to cable TV and the peak of shopping malls, or as a political turning point that changed the world in social, political, as well as media trends as we know it today. The 1980s, although really not that long ago, were a different time. For example, as crazy it may sound, you weren't actually legally required to use your seatbelt in a car until 1984. The Cabbage Patch dolls of the 1980s became crazy enough to the point that parents were getting into fights with each other at malls across the country to get their hands on one of the toys. In fact, the trend was so huge, 20,000 fake Cabbage Patch dolls, many containing dangerous substances that generally don't make their way into doll stuffing, were seized by custom agents before Christmas in 1984. Other popular toys included the Rubik's Cube, which sold out during its debut year in 1980, and the Teddy Ruxpin Bears, as well as Transformers. In 1981, MTV launched the first music video ever to air. Video killed the radio star, and people were saying, "I want my MTV," which also made music videos an art form, with Michael Jackson's 13-minute long Thriller being the first of its kind. Olivia Newton-John's song Physical, which reflected the popularity of aerobics and the likes of Jane Fonda's workout tapes, was also the decade's most popular song. In addition to music television, Ted Turner launched CNN, changing the way news was covered forever with his 24-hour cable news network. TV was also airing The Simpsons for the first time in 1987, as well as Alf, Married with Children, and in the early 80s, Dallas and MASH pulled record audiences. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Beetlejuice, 16 Candles, and Top Gun were some of the classic films to come out of the decade as well. Women of the 80s were shattering glass ceilings in a variety of professions, and as they would say, standing on their own shoulder pads. In 1983, Sally Ride became the first American woman in space. In 1984, US Representative Geraldine Ferraro became the first female vice presidential candidate for a major party. And in 1986, Oprah Winfrey became the first woman to produce her own talk show, as well as own it. Swatch watches were introduced in 1983 and started a fashion craze. Again, shoulder pads and oversized double-breasted suits with floppy silk ties were high fashion, which the movies such as 9 to 5 in 1980 and Working Girl in 1988 brought more popularity to. The women of the 80s used fashion to express their growing power in the working world with masculine style garments, which the suit look was also embraced by First Lady Nancy Reagan. Madonna also made fingerless lace gloves a worldwide trend after her performance of Like a Virgin at the MTV VMAs in 1984. The 80s signaled the beginning of the computer age with the beginnings of the World Wide Web. Motorola introduced the first mobile phones, which can literally be compared to carrying a sack of potatoes on your shoulder by your ear. In the United States in 1983, Nintendo released the Game Boy in 1989 as well. And in fact, in 1982, the computer was named Time Magazine's Man of the Year. Mall food courts, the staple of the 1980s, think about the Battle of Starcourt featured in Netflix's Stranger Things with their collection of popular fast food choices, which included Sbarro Pizza, Orange Julius, and Auntie Anne's Pretzels. Nolan Bushnell, who is the co-founder of Atari, started the trend of eatertainment when he opened a family-friendly restaurant filled with animatronic animals, video games, and pizza, which was, of course, Chuck E. Cheese. That led to others, including Dave & Buster's in 1982 and Medieval Times in 1983. Pac-Man and Centipede were also both released in 1980, and Street Fighter was released in 1988, which also contributed to the rise in mall arcades. Mall fare or not, the 1980s was a time of classic snacks, including pizza rolls, Lunchables, and fruit roll-ups. The 1980s had its fair share of disasters and tragedies as well. John Lennon was killed in 1980, and in the same year, the AIDS virus was identified. Marvin Gaye was also murdered by his father in 1984, and Japanese Flight 123, carrying 524 passengers, crashed in 1984, leaving only 4 survivors, which is now remaining the worst airline crash in history still to this day. In 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred, and Krista McCullough and her fellow astronauts died during the Challenger explosion, which was also in 1986. On April 15th, 1989, the Hillsborough disaster occurred during an FA Cup semifinal in Sheffield, England, fatally crushing 96 football fans and injuring nearly 1,000 more. Anne Frances Robbins Davis, whose childhood nickname was Nancy and was named after her grandmother's, was born in Queens, New York on July 6, 1921 to Edith and Kenneth Robbins. New York State is actually known as the, quote, mother state of presidents' wives, with Nancy being the 9th of 10 born in the state. She was supposed to actually be born on July 4th, but her mother, an enthusiastic baseball fan, always said her birth was delayed till the 6th because the Yankees were playing a doubleheader that day. Nancy's mother worked on an NBC radio soap opera called The Betty and Bob Show, where she played a socialite as well as a maid. Her mother was the only woman to ever appear on another program The Amos and Andy Show. Nancy's mother and father divorced when she was 7, and then Edith resumed her acting career. Nancy fluctuated during her life between theater to theater as a baby to a young girl in Battery Park, Maryland with her aunt and uncle. When Nancy was living with her relatives, they were actually so close to DC, she participated in the Easter egg roll at the White House in the years Grace Coolidge was First Lady. During one of her mother's visits, she taught her daughter the latest dance craze, the Charleston. Nancy loved dressing up as a kid, and in fact, dressed up in her mother's theater costumes and makeup. She was, quote, over the moon when her mother bought her a Mary Pickford wig. When her mother married Loyal Davis, a neurosurgeon, they moved to his home in Chicago, and Nancy became a member of prominent society. Dr. Loyal Davis adopted Nancy in 1935 at the age of 16, making her the only First Lady who was legally adopted by her mother's second husband, and she always considered him to be her actual father. Loyal Davis actually wrote a biography about John Murphy, who was the physician who treated Teddy Roosevelt after he was shot. Nancy was even able to sit in the gallery during some of his operations and was once allowed into the operating room. Now, Edith Davis, Nancy's mother, was the longest living first mother at 99 years old. Nancy also had a very famous godmother, another actress, Alla Nazimova, who was born in what is now the Ukraine. Nancy officially began her acting career in small productions at Smith College and worked during vacations, which included cleaning dressing rooms. And she recounted as being interesting as a job to do because you could, quote, tell a lot about people from the way they left their dressing rooms. She also upholstered furniture, played backstage music, and distributed signage around town when they were on tour. When she finally made it on stage, her first line was, "Dinner is served." However, she acted in plays in her younger years while attending the Latin Girls' School in Chicago, one of which was actually titled First Lady. After college, she began acting in the subway circuit before landing her one and only Broadway role in Lute Song. Nancy graduated from college in 1943, and she said, quote, "I majored in English and drama and boys." She then began working in Chicago at the Marshall Field's department store, but she was also introduced more into the acting world through friends of her mother and was cast in the play Ramshackle Inn. In 1949, Nancy moved to Hollywood and began a 7-year contract with MGM. Nancy said, quote, "Joining Metro was like walking into a dream world," but also admitted she felt nervous as well as gullible. She billed herself as Nancy Davis and starred in 11 feature films, the first being The Doctor and the Girl. And her acting roles also included one in The Dark Wave, which went on to become an Academy Award-nominated documentary. Her first appearance on film, however, was in a short that was shown before the feature film in theaters in 1940 and raised money for the prevention of polio, which basically made her a health advocate at a very young age. Ironically, these polio films were sponsored by none other than Eleanor Roosevelt. Nancy, though, has said her favorite role she ever played was that of Miss Catherine Mead in 1951's Night into Morning. Nancy mingled with many high-profile celebrities, both before and during her time in Hollywood. Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy, and Mary Martin were all frequent guests of the Davises household, as well as Walter and Nan Huston. She referred to him as Uncle Walter, and one summer they wrote and produced their own little movie with her brother acting as the director, and Walter and Nancy were the stars of the show. She was also friends with Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor. Nancy's mother also once told her, quote, "Nancy, if you hear from a man who tells you he's Clark Gable, be sure not to say, 'Sure, and I'm Greta Garbo,' because it could very well be Clark Gable." Nancy did end up spending a lot of time with Clark Gable, so much it was reported in the gossip columns, AKA the tabloids of the 50s. Now, Nancy met Ronald Reagan while acting in the movie East Side, West Side after her name appeared wrongfully on an alleged list of communist supporters during the Red Scare. She asked Ronald, who was president of the Screen Actors Guild at the time, for help over dinner. When Nancy finally received her own dressing room, which was basically a sign she had arrived at MGM, Ronnie gave her a card with a gold key and instructions on how to have it cut to fit the lock. Nancy was 30 years old when she married Ronald on March 4th, 1952. The couple wanted to have a simple, quiet ceremony, but Nancy wrote in her memoir that she poked fun at him about missing out on her dream proposal, which would have included a sunset canoe ride, and a serenade with a ukulele, quote, trailing my fingers in the water the way they used to do in the old movies I saw as a little girl. Now, 25 years later, though, on their anniversary, Ronnie gifted her true love, a canoe. And when they took it out on their lake, he told her he hoped it was okay. He only hummed and didn't bring a ukulele. But for their wedding, Nancy said, quote, Ronnie gave me a bouquet of flowers. I wore a gray wool suit, a white shirt with a white collar, and a small flowered hat with a veil. I still have my wedding set, which turned up again in the fall of 1988 when unpacking boxes in Los Angeles. It didn't look bad either, and it still fits. Now, she also saved the plastic groom and bride from the top of the cake. They spent one night of their honeymoon, again, at the Old Mission Inn in Riverside, California, where red roses were awaiting them. Nancy ultimately gave the roses to an elderly lady who was ill and staying across the hall from them before they headed off to the Arizona Biltmore in Phoenix. The Old Mission Inn has a long history of hosting presidential guests, including Harrison, McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, Hoover, Kennedy, Ford, Bush, and the Nixons were actually married there in what is now the Presidential Lounge. The Reagans lived at Yearling Road during the first several years of their marriage, which happened to be the same time that Grace Kelly married Prince Rainier III, becoming Prince Grace of Monaco back in the day, which led Ronald to once say, quote, do you realize that Yearling Road is the same size as Monaco, and you could be Queen Nancy and I could be King Ronnie? The Reagans eventually settled in the Pacific Palisades area of Los Angeles in a home built with all the newest technologies because it was funded by General Electric, which Ronald was working as a spokesperson nationally. GE turned the home into a showcase, providing them all of the latest appliances, including multiple ovens, refrigerators, lights, and a built-in garbage disposal, which all required them to actually add a special panel on the side of the house for switches and wiring. At this particular house, Ronald planted an olive tree outside after the birth of Patty, and Nancy claimed she used to drive by the house just to see the tree. The Reagans had 2 children of their own, Patricia Ann Reagan, also known as Patty, and Ronald Prescott Reagan Jr., who they called Skip, or just sometimes Ron. Nancy was also stepmother of 2 children, Maureen and Michael, from Ronald's first marriage to Jane Wyman. After they married and began having children, Nancy appeared in 3 more films, one of which included Hellcats of the Navy in 1956, where she starred alongside her husband, but ultimately retired in order to focus on being a homemaker and mother. She once said, quote, I never was a career girl. She recounts herself that she had seen too many Hollywood marriages fail, and Ronnie was, quote, her whole life, and wasn't willing to risk it on an acting career, which she also compared to that of her mother's, as Nancy had seen her failed marriage only to find success in one after her retirement from acting. Nancy once said, quote, when I left MGM, I had 8 films behind me. I was proud of what I had accomplished, happy to stop there. They did, however, have some financial difficulties, and Nancy returned for Donovan's Brain, a sci-fi film. Ronald also continued his work doing a stint in Las Vegas in 1954, but he always missed home, especially bringing up the Bermuda Bell in his letters, which sometimes the floorboard of their car, they would ring, indicating he was home, a family ritual of sorts. Patty and Nancy would hear the bell and wave to him from the window. Ronald Reagan was elected governor of California in 1967, and during this time, Nancy advocated and lobbied for Vietnam veterans, and she also promoted the foster grandparent program, which she continued to advocate for as First Lady. In 1969, Ronald, who was a divorcee himself, signed the first non-fault divorce law, marking the beginning of what was known as the divorce revolution. Nancy disliked, however, living in Sacramento at the governor's mansion, and she ultimately moved her family to an upscale exclusive neighborhood, which kind of made people brand her as snobbish. Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign hinged on the fact that Carter had ushered in an economic recession, and the 1980s were a time of high unemployment and skyrocketing inflation. Ronald took this opportunity and ran on the platform, which would lead to Reaganomics, as well as coining of the term Teflon presidency by Representative Pat Schroeder, because she was frying eggs in a nonstick pan, and it represented not only a willingness of voters to excuse some politicians, but not others, and referred to the fact that Reagan was like Teflon, nothing really stuck to him. While campaigning for both his run for governor and for president, Nancy picked up some tips, which included never saying the name of the town you're in because you go to so many in one day, you're bound to slip up. So you should just say, it's nice to be here. And to never wear a ring on your right hand when shaking hands because it hurts when the ring presses into your finger. She also would pass out chocolates to the press during the campaigns because neither she or Ronnie liked that type of sweet, and she preferred cookies, and he, of course, preferred jelly beans. Nancy also had a tradition of rolling an orange down the aisle of the plane during the campaigns as the plane took off from the runway. Nancy Reagan became First Lady on January 20th, 1981. The inauguration was the first ever held on the west front of the Capitol because that meant the ceremony was facing towards the rest of the nation rather than toward the Atlantic Ocean. The day of the inauguration was extremely cold. So also for the first time, the ceremony was held inside the Capitol building rotunda. The Times Magazine reported that something slightly extraordinary happened during Reagan's inaugural speech. The gray sky was said to have parted and the sun shone on him. And when he finished, the sun disappeared once again. The transition of power was slightly awkward from the moment Nancy toured the White House with Rosalind Carter, who seemed she did not want to leave. The car ride to the Capitol was also slightly awkward as the two women sat in silence during the ride. Now, Nancy has said that while she loved her time as First Lady, it was also some of the most demanding and punishing times of her life, mostly because the Reagan White House was very different than their predecessors, the Carters. Nancy said, quote, "But life in the White House is magnified. The highs were higher than I expected and the lows were much lower." Even though she believed she was prepared for being First Lady due to her experience in the public as not only an actress, but a governor's wife, she quickly realized this was very different and said, quote, nothing prepares you for being First Lady." She claims that she threw herself into the various First Lady roles as spokeswoman, hostess, manager, and friend. She thought all of them were important, but there was one part of the job that outranked them all. And she said, above everything else, the First Lady is the president's wife. Nancy poses that this hasn't been a new issue, but one that is ongoing. A question as to how much influence a woman should have on a person of power, such as the president. She goes on to say that, of course, she had input and advice, as every wife does, but ultimately Ronald was the power and she was the only one that was able to advise him appropriately because she didn't have another underlying agenda. After their first state dinner, which was held in honor of Margaret Thatcher, she used many china patterns, including those of Wilson, both Roosevelt's and Truman, because according to Nancy, there simply was not enough china of one pattern to go around. China had actually been a problem at the White House for various reasons, including bread and butter plates being stolen by guests during Eleanor Roosevelt's time as First Lady, as well as linen napkins being discontinued during the Kennedy administration for the same reason. Her spending was widely criticized, and everything from her gowns, which were donated to her, to the infamous purchase of a new set of china for the White House, which cost $209,000, about $1,000 per place setting, and her excessive renovations, which were made exceptionally worse due to the economic recession at the beginning of the 80s. The dining was very formal, and combined with her attendance to the royal wedding of Princess Diana and Prince Charles, which was actually the longest the Reagans were apart during the presidency, the American public began to call her Queen Nancy. She was also called the Iron Butterfly, the Belle of Rodeo Drive, Fancy Nancy, and Gloria Steinem called her the Marzipan wife because she had no interests at all. Joan Didion chimed in saying she was only interested in rich friends, fancy clothes, and was a, quote, supercilious and shallow socialite, a lady who loved going out shopping and going to lunch, basically calling her, unfortunately, an airhead. Johnny Carson once joked that her favorite junk food was caviar, and the press also said she had a, quote, doe-eyed devotion to her husband. Nancy recalled that she had, quote, won the unpopularity contest hands down, because in 1981, she had the lowest approval rating of any modern First Lady. Even with the criticism, Nancy proved, though, that she could make fun of herself as well. Despite being a former actress, she disliked giving speeches or being in the public eye in general. She once said, quote, "I was far too private to play myself." Even so, she once sang Barbra Streisand at the famous Gridiron Club, which is one of Washington, D.C.'s longest running press events, and was asked to do an encore and also told jokes and danced. And it was easily ultimately hailed by the press as the most well-prepared performance of any First Lady. In fact, the New York Times responded to her performing as a bad girl and singing that she would still wear a tiara in her hair, even though Ronnie was cutting back on welfare, as, quote, sacco. Nancy was more interested in making the White House a home instead of her roles as First Lady, as she put her family first. She actually used private funds rather than money from the government to make the renovations, which included floors and doors and even more. Her redecoration of the White House was scrutinized either way, however, but one of the butlers who had worked for various first families over 30 years told her it was, quote, beginning to look like the White House again. Nancy's improvements were most limited to the private resident areas, mainly the second and third floors of the White House, which was closed to the public. The renovations, though, were featured in Architectural Digest magazine in the winter of 1981. And Nancy believes, according to her biography, this was really no help in making Americans see her as less than expensive, basically, because Architectural Digest magazine at that time sold for about $4. So Nancy had hoped to be able to compare her style as well as her White House restorations to Jackie Kennedy. However, Jackie's renovations were more about history, while Nancy's were seemingly to the public more about the private areas. Some Americans went as far as to say, quote, the Reagans should tighten their belts, to which Nancy replied, they basically weren't making any money in the White House for themselves. The American people basically saw her as benefiting from the 1980s recession. Nancy, who became a fashion icon, of course, will always be known for wearing her signature color red, which became known as Reagan Red. She once said, quote, I like red, it's a picker-upper. Nancy believed that, in her words, means it's dressing simply. And she followed Ginger Rogers' advice to basically look in the mirror and then take one thing off, saying, quote, as the old saying goes, fashion passes, style remains. Nancy has admitted to even being attached to more than just clothing, but that she, quote, hangs on to things for forever. You practically have to use dynamite to get them away from me. She even compares this to Ronnie, giving her a hard time because she still had her gym bloomers from high school. But they have also said that Nancy was a proclaimed last-minute dresser. Nancy was also a feminist. She once said, feminism is the ability to choose what you want to do. In fact, Sandra Day O'Connor was nominated as the first female Supreme Court justice by President Reagan in 1981. She also supported the arts, especially giving young artists a forum, specifically in the In Performance at the White House, which aired in August of 1988. In addition, Nancy had a passion for animals, which included her dogs, Rex and Lucky. Lucky, named after a nickname of her mother, Edith Davis, was given to her in 1985 as a gift from the March of Dimes, but ultimately had to leave the White House because she was getting too big. Their other pup, Rex, who was a spaniel, was gifted to Nancy in that same year and was named after Rex Scouten, the White House chief usher who retired in 1985. And Rex, the dog, ended up retiring with them to LA after the White House. Nancy's most notable work as First Lady was the Just Say No campaign to promote drug prevention programs. The name of the campaign came from a child who said, just say no was the best response if they were ever offered drugs. Her drug prevention efforts knew no bounds. And in 1985, she hosted an international conference on drug abuse by bringing together the first ladies of 17 different countries. In October 1986, President Reagan signed the National Crusade for a Drug-Free America bill into law, and Nancy made an unexpected appearance in a joint address to the nation with him on the drug problem in America. Later in 1988, she became the first Lady to address the UN General Assembly and spoke on trafficking laws as well as international drug sanctions and prohibitions. Although the 1980s is a decade most associated with the war on drugs, it actually started under Nixon, who said that drug abuse was, quote, public enemy number one. On March 30th, 1981, Ronald Reagan survived an assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr., who had actually stalked Carter first and was obsessed with the movie Taxi Driver as he stepped out of Washington, D.C.'s Hilton Hotel. Reagan was hit in the chest, just centimeters from his heart. Reagan believed he survived in order to end the Cold War and was spared due to divine intervention, saying he believed history could have been much different had he died. While being treated after the shooting, Reagan reportedly said before surgery that he hoped all the surgeons were Republicans. The bullet missed his heart by 1 inch, and people stood outside the hospital with signs that said, "Tonight we are all Republicans." The Academy Awards ceremony, hosted by Johnny Carson, was postponed due to the shooting. And when they finally played his pre-recorded message, which the awards were 2 days after the shooting, the crowd applauded. Now, sadly, John Hinckley Jr. is now out of prison and has gone on tour performing original songs. Afterwards, Nancy became known as the person who managed her husband's schedule and did so by consulting an astrologer. She always knew his schedule and what public places he would be speaking, as well as for what groups and what times. She even went as far as to stay up to date on his private engagement details as well. At this time, Nancy also started consulting Joan Quigley, who became her personal astrological advisor on what these days and times were ideal for not only prosperity, but also safety. She consulted with her on a regular basis, often 2 to 3 times a day, and scheduled the president's meetings and appearances based on her advice. Joan would time his speeches and travel down to the day, hour, and minute. Ronnie would often ask Nancy, "What does Joan say?" which is also the title of Joan's book that details her 7 years as the White House astrologer to the Reagans. Nancy also supposedly once said, quote, "Fate deals the cards." In fact, Nancy thanked Joan, telling her she had been, quote, "very important to this administration." Nancy was also into horoscopes and would read them almost religiously in the paper. She was a Cancer, making her above all a homemaker and a nester, as well as, quote, "intuitive, vulnerable, sensitive, and fearful of ridicule, all of which," she said, "like it or not, I am." Nancy was not only Ronald's protector, but was a close and trusted advisor. A friend of the Reagans once said, quote, "Without Nancy, there would have been no Governor Reagan, no President Reagan." Due to the fact that some of his staff would approach her with concerns rather than the president, upset some of the media, and some refer to her as, quote, "an incipient Edith Wilson," a former First Lady who stepped in for her husband and essentially acted as president after he suffered a stroke. Nancy was a direct line to the president. This was also upsetting to those within the administration, including Don Reagan, the White House chief of staff, but was ultimately fired, and he believed that was due to direct advice from Nancy herself. Now, in her 1989 memoir, Nancy said, quote, "However the First Lady fits in, she has a unique and important role to play in looking after her husband. I always did that for Ronnie, and I always will." She was so devoted to Ronnie, they began calling it the Nancy gaze because of her devoted, transfixed look at him during their public appearances. A key component on the Reagan era was his economic policies, which reduced taxes, promoted unchecked free market activities under the claim that it would generate more revenue, and it became known as Reaganomics. The policy promoted small government, limited government spending, and led to one of the best economic periods in regards to growth in the United States history. However, it did mostly benefit the wealthy as well as corporations. In addition to his economic policies, Reagan also aimed to bring back conservative values such as family and morality, which led to his supporters being known as Reagan Republicans. Another important event in the Reagan administration was the meeting between Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, and the president. Nancy was actually the one to promote the idea of Ronald forming a personal relationship with the new leader when he assumed power in 1985, because she believed it simply made no sense that the two would not have an open dialogue with one another. The two met in Iceland in 1986, where Reagan wanted to discuss a variety of topics, including human rights, but Gorbachev only wanted to talk about arms control, leading to the talks to fall apart. However, this all led to the 1987 Inf Treaty, which called for the mutual destruction of intermediate range nuclear missiles, and is seen as a historic moment for the Reagan administration and an important step in the end of Soviet communism. Just prior to the treaty signing, Nancy was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent surgery. She, like Betty Ford before her, encouraged and was instrumental in getting women to receive regular mammograms. Even though she was dealing with her health issues, as well as the death of her mother, she was committed to seeing the relationship between the two leaders through. President Reagan would later go on to famously say, quote, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," in 1987. 2 years later, the Berlin Wall that divided East and West Germany fell and began the thawing of the Cold War. In 1986, Gorbachev issued a New Year's Day greeting to Americans, wishing the country good health, and Nancy appeared on Moscow TV, wishing them a year of peace. Nancy also recalls in My Turn, her autobiography, that every encounter with Mikhail's wife was heavily analyzed, especially focusing on their fashion choices. Nancy wrote, quote, "Every time we appeared together, we were seen as contestants in some international pageant. When you think about it, the whole business was ridiculous." Their trips, though, were not without problems, even if her astrologer essentially planned their itinerary for success. For example, the Bitburg Controversy in 1985, when the Reagans visited a cemetery in Germany that contained Nazi graves to lay a wreath in honor of the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II, rather than make a stop at a concentration camp, which led to Holocaust survivor and author Elie Wiesel to speak out on the offensiveness of the visit. After the backlash, the Reagans did ultimately visit Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. After leaving the White House, the Reagans moved back to California, where wealthy friends purchased them a home in the wealthy Eastgate Old Bel Air neighborhood. They also spent time at the Reagan Ranch in Santa Barbara. Nancy published her memoir in 1989, and the dedication said, quote, "To Ronnie, who always understood, and to my children, who I hope will understand." She also created the Nancy Reagan Foundation, which continued her efforts to establish drug prevention programs in schools and resulted in after-school programs such as DARE, which began in 1983. After the passage of the Drug-Free Schools and Committees Act of 1986, they continued to educate the general public about substance abuse issues. Ronald was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 1994, leading them to support Alzheimer's research, and their names were used in Chicago's research facility. Nancy advocated for the use of stem cells in the research and treatment of Alzheimer's and praised President Obama when he legalized their use. During this time, Nancy rarely traveled or attended events, instead focusing on taking care of Ronald. She and Ronnie wrote love letters to each other throughout their marriage until the effects of the Alzheimer's disease began to fully take over. She did, however, become only the second former First Lady to attend a Republican National Convention back in 1996. Ronald passed away in June of 2004, and after his death, Nancy continued to advocate for stem cell research. And in an interview with Vanity Fair in 2009, Nancy said, quote, "It sounds strange, but I still see Ronnie." Nancy's main focus after Ronnie's death was to bring public attention to his legacy. Nancy attended as well as helped organize events at the Reagan Library. The curators at the Reagan Library were ecstatic to receive personal donations from Nancy, including her wedding clothes, her children's baby shoes, and more, saying they were, quote, "nothing less than a treasure." Nancy was also awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her tireless work in helping POWs and veterans, her work with the Foster Grandparents Program, and of course, for her anti-drug programs. Nancy once said, "I've had quite a life when you stop to think about it." She passed away on March 6, 2016 at the age of 94 from congestive heart failure in her home in Los Angeles. Now, no other presidential couple, though, threw parties like those of the Reagans. They hosted some of the best White House parties of all time, and Nancy has been known for being one of the greatest hostesses in White House history, with her glamorous star-studded galas. The guest list reflected their Hollywood background and included Tom Cruise, Cary Grant, Cher, a young Drew Barrymore, and Meryl Streep, as well as Audrey Hepburn, Frank Sinatra. And Frank Sinatra was the one who famously Ronald Reagan, cut in to dance with his wife in a now famous photo. Now, the Reagans may have had more celebrity friends than any other Republican in POTUS and FLOTUS history. They even had Mr. T dressed as Santa one year at Christmas in the White House. And in 1985, Princess Diana danced with John Travolta, which the dress she wore, subsequently called the Travolta dress, recently sold for over $362,000 in 2013. Now, Nancy said her guest list that she had tried to basically gather people from all different types of walks of life so that their experiences and interests and the variety would lead to good conversation and an enjoyable evening. Nancy also said, quote, "A well thought out guest list is the main ingredient to a successful dinner party." However, not all of their parties were fancy. They also hosted picnics on the South Lawn, but no matter what was on the menu or who was in attendance, their events were legendary. When they weren't hosting lavish parties and dinners, they often ate at tray tables while watching the evening news. Here we go. Nancy's table in the old family dining room always included fresh floral centerpieces with pale yellow and peach colored flowers, which she preferred, but her favorite flowers were white peonies. But she will actually always be known to botanical experts as a lover of orchids. Nancy loved orchids, and they bred a reddish hybrid that was meant to match her sophistication and style brought to the White House just for her. In fact, every First Lady since 1929 has had her own special variety of orchid, but Nancy's is actually the most difficult to get a hold of. So she was dedicated to helping her husband succeed in domestic and foreign policy and did so by way of entertaining. Nancy supervised and ultimately decided what foods were served. Nancy loved to make people feel at home when they were visiting the White House. Her press secretary, Elaine Crispin, said she put a great deal of thought into what the menu would be and that she would always see Nancy down in the kitchen sampling the desserts and doing taste tests for dishes for upcoming events. One of Nancy's favorite desserts was pumpkin pecan pie, and their meals for friends and family often started with onion wine soup, which we're going to be making this evening. And we'll also be making the Baja California chicken, which was a favorite of both Reagans. Now, Ronald had a nostalgic taste for modest meals and down-home cooking of his earlier days, which also included hamburger soup. They also frequently enjoyed meatloaf, chopped steak, lamb chops, and as Nancy said, quote, or if Ronnie was lucky, some macaroni and cheese. Breakfast always included grapefruit or orange juice accompanied with cold bran and cereal with milk, which also occasionally included fruit and decaffeinated coffee. The recipes we'll be making tonight came from the Reagan Library and belong to Nancy. Most of them were actually published in an article in Formal Evenings at the White House in McCall's magazine back in 1986. Now, a fun fact about the monkey bread recipe we'll be making is that she began serving it at the White House, and it's now become a standard for the Christmas buffet. She most likely got the recipe from Zazu Pitts, who Nancy toured with during her time in the play Ramshackle Inn. Nancy also arranged to have it served to Ronald prior to his testimony in the Iran-Contra hearings, to which he told her, although we might go to jail, he would always remember the monkey bread. All right, so thank you for listening. I'm going to step back over here and we are going to cook. Okay, so we are making several dishes tonight. We won't be able to like finish them all, so I do have finished products to show you. But the first thing we're gonna get started is our Baja California chicken, because we need to let this kind of cook in the pan for a little bit. But what we're gonna do first, you're gonna like towel dry, pat dry your chicken breast pieces. Generously cover them with salt and pepper. Like that. And then I already have this mixed together, but this is olive oil and tarragon vinegar. So we're gonna just put that in the pan. And then we are gonna bring that over here and get this started cooking before we put it in our baking dish. Okay. The Baja California chicken is actually really simple to make. In regards to chicken. Okay, oh, we're also gonna add our garlic to that as well. And then we'll need our sherry for after we kind of roast this a little bit and then to bake it. So we'll go ahead and put our sherry in the baking dish so it will be ready for our chicken once it's done in the pan. Okay, so while we get that started, we are also going to make Ronald Reagan's favorite mac and cheese this evening. I have already made the macaroni. So we've got our macaroni over here and really simple. All we're gonna do is add in one egg that's been beaten and 1 teaspoon of butter. We'll turn that on and warm it up just a little bit more. We're going to stir that in. Okay. And then we have a salt, dry mustard, milk, and a little bit of hot water that we're going to stir in as well. And we'll let that get going for just a minute. But we will have a buttered casserole dish. And so once that kind of gets mixed up and we warm it up a little bit, we're going to put it in here and mix it with the cheese. So again, while we're kind of waiting on that, we're going to get our onion wine soup. So if you have your recipe cards, I have made it all the way up to where it says puree mixture in a blender. And that's just because it takes 30 minutes. You have to get it boiling and then simmer it. So that part is done. So I have that over here. And then you just take the mixture, you return it to the saucepan. And then first we're going to blend in our dry white wine, vinegar, as well as sugar to our mix. I'm going to turn that on because it's going to have to simmer too. And then we're going to bring that to a boil. So once it starts boiling, then we are going to turn it down to a simmer and stir in our cream and parsley and season it a little bit with salt and pepper. So also another really simple, but they actually use the onion and wine soup. They a lot of times started some of the meals out at the White House with the onion wine soup. But while we're kind of getting all that going, not only was Nancy kind of into astrology, but they're kind of one of the ones that have claimed to have ghostly experiences or their family. So although many people have claimed the White House is haunted, now the Reagan's daughter, though, Maureen, who is one of the most frequent guests at the White House, very much claimed to have experiences. She usually stayed in the Lincoln bedroom, which actually President Lincoln used as a room for cabinet meetings, not a bedroom, but of course that's what they call it. But nonetheless, his ghost has been sighted in that room many times. And the Reagans occasionally have not only encountered him, but also the ghosts of redcoats. Now, once Maureen's husband woke up to a transparent man standing near the fireplace wearing a red coat. And after the experience, Rex, her husband, actually refused to go into the room. Now, Nancy also recalls that she was in the Lincoln bedroom one day and a maid said to her, oh, quote, he's been here again, because something like a curtain had been opened or something and nobody had been in there. A butler also told her that he had heard someone playing a piano, but when they investigated, no one was there. So a little bit about White House haunting history and some of the experiences that the Reagans had. Okay, so our chicken's going. So really, we're just going to just brown this a little bit on both sides. We're not gonna totally cook it because then we're gonna bake it. So that looks good. And then our mac and cheese is looking really good too. So I'm gonna bring it over and we're gonna stir in our cheese. And you'll wanna save just a little bit to sprinkle on the top. And we of course won't have time to completely finish this one, but I do have a finished one. So we'll get this. So we just stir in our cheese, mac and cheese, so simple, American classic. So there we have it. And we're gonna just pour it again into our buttered dish. And then we're gonna sprinkle our cheese on the top. And then you'll just bake this in the oven for about 45 minutes or until it gets kind of crispy on top. So there you have it. So we will put that in the oven here in a bit. But what you will get is Ronald Reagan's favorite mac and cheese. Okay, so our chicken's looking really good. So once we get this done, literally we just transfer it and put it into the sherry. And then you'll also bake that, but for about 10 minutes. I think ultimately I baked mine for 15 minutes. And you're going to serve this alongside her two-tone rice. So she took wild rice and cooked that down with broth. And then you take your white rice, put it in a little baking dish like this one, and just nothing on it. And then you can pop that in the oven on a low oven and toast it. And then you just combine the two and you add in, let's see, refer to my, you add in soy as well as minced onions. And that's what you do. You serve your chicken alongside that. So while we're waiting on our chicken, I will show you the finished product for that. So this was one of their favorite dishes, Baja California chicken and two-tone wild rice. Alrighty, with our onion wine soup, we're still waiting on it a little bit to simmer. So we're gonna go ahead and make our monkey bread dough. So I already have the yeast and a little bit of milk in here. So it's all activated and ready to go. And what we're gonna do then is we're just going to add in some of our dry ingredients and get that going. And then we're gonna add in our remaining milk. I used about 1/4 cup of milk in with the yeast to activate it, and then we'll use the remaining cup. So we're just gonna kind of slowly add that in. And then at the same time, we're gonna go ahead and add in our 2 eggs. And we're also gonna start adding in our flour. I always say the disclaimer, I am not a chef. I went to school for history. So I do my best on the cooking parts, but we'll let that get going. And our chicken is about ready to go to the pan. All right, and then we're just going to start adding in our butter. My mixer has been crazy lately. I apologize. I think it's wore out. There we go. All right. Now, of course, with the dough, we're gonna have to let it rise. I do have a finished project, but I also have secondary dough over here so we can actually put the monkey bread together. So now that we've got that all mixed up, then we are just going to cover this and you'll let it rise for a couple hours until it doubles in size. Okay, so before we put our monkey bread in the pan, we are gonna take our chicken and put it in with our sherry. And then this will go in the oven again on 350. And I like to add the garlic and the oil left over in the pan in there with it too, because it gives it kind of a nice flavor. And then we'll bake this on 350 for 10 minutes. But again, this will be your finished Baja chicken with two-toned rice. All right, so our onion soup is getting ready to start to boil. So as soon as it does, we'll turn it down to simmer and add our last 2 ingredients in there. But with our monkey bread, once your dough has risen, we're gonna take it, you're gonna roll it out into a log and then cut it in about 24 equal size shapes, and then roll your dough in into little balls. Now, one thing too, Nancy, and maybe Ronald too, but for sure Nancy, she was kind of surprised when they moved to the White House and realized that everything, like their food and kind of incidentals and toiletries and different things, actually weren't paid for, that they had to actually pay for some of those things. So they were basically, they were charged for every meal, dry cleaning, toiletries, all that sort of thing. They also would pay for their guest meals unless it was a state dinner. So Nancy was a really cool one to read about. Actually, she kind of lived a really interesting life and kind of had a lot of different experiences from, again, kind of being carted around by her mother and going from theater to theater, and then having to live with her aunt and uncle for a while. And then finally with her situation in Chicago, she sort of, kind of had a taste of wealth. And then from her time in Hollywood, and then of course being First Lady. So she kind of lived, in my opinion, one of the kind of more interesting and diverse lives of any First Lady. So we're just gonna keep on going. You just drop them in and kind of stack them up on each other. And then I'm sure some of you tuning in have had monkey bread before. Hers does not call for brown sugar or cinnamon or any of that kind of thing on top. However, you can add that if you want. Some monkey bread recipes do call for that. Hers was a little bit more simple. So we've got all this in here. Also going to bake this, and we're just going to put a little bit of an egg wash on this. And then we will also be baking this a little later, but I will show you the final product. So there we have it, our pre-cooked monkey bread. And what you'll get is Nancy Reagan's lovely monkey bread. All right, so our last recipe is the onion wine soup. So we're going to turn that down to low because it's boiling. And then we are going to add our cream and our parsley. And then from there, it's just salt and pepper to taste to your liking. So we'll stir that. And then you'll just let that kind of simmer and sit for, again, about 5 minutes or so. And your soup will be ready to serve. And what you will have is Nancy Reagan's onion wine soup. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Nancy Reagan, although controversial at times, has become one of the most adored first ladies. And according to biographers and historians like myself, I do believe that they were one of the most, one of the most important facts about the Reagans was their love for one another, and that the time showed more than any other presidential couple prior that they were truly one of a kind as a couple. Now, Charles Heston actually also said once, quote, "They were probably the greatest love affair in the history of the American presidency." Excuse me. So don't forget to follow along with the National First Ladies Library on all of their socials. And you can also see more of my stuff on their YouTube, as well as my Instagram page at Cooking with the First Lady. So again, thanks y'all so much. And if anybody has any questions, will try to do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful. And it's always, every time we host a program about Nancy Reagan, we have a lot of feedback. Almost everybody in the chat seems has lived through the 80s and either experienced it as I have as a child with the Teddy Ruxpin and the hot dogs and Orange Julius, or has a lot of political commentary and feelings. So it's interesting to see all of the feedback we get about Nancy Reagan. And I think that's why it's so interesting to discuss her. So thank you so much for sharing the recipes. First, we love the Nancy Reagan red dress that you're wearing and the
Thank you.
back of it. It's amazing. Can you tell us about it?
No, it's from my closet. I just absolutely was not going to be able to do a Nancy Reagan live program without a red dress. I did red nails. I mean, you know, I always have to kind of be a little bit on theme with it. And so.
So the other question, we had some questions, like technical questions about, first of all, the drink, and if you prefer to, you don't have a shaker, do you prefer to strain your drinks? And was there a particular reason you used a strainer for this one? That was a question.
I used one for this one because I didn't want the ice cubes in the glass.
Okay.
So you don't have to strain it. You can leave the ice cubes. I just personally thought it was prettier without the ice cubes. Yeah. So that was the only reason to strain it. I used to have a shaker. I don't know what's happened to it. So shakers are cool, but stirring it works too, especially it's, you know, it's not like a whole bunch of ingredients and you don't have, you know, stuff to really dissolve. So as long as you but you don't need to strain it. I just don't like the ice cubes in this one.
That totally makes sense. So the other technical question was related to supplies and pans for the monkey bread. Some people in the chat were saying they don't have a springboard pan. Would a bunt pan work just as well? Or do you have any other recommendations for alternatives?
Yeah, you could even use, you know, like casserole dishes. I just happen to use this one because it just so happens it's 9-inch pan and that's what they called for. And I was using my other similar sized casserole dishes that would have been able to be baked in for the other things. So you can really, yeah, you can use anything that you can bake in. And I almost do want to say a lot of times with monkey bread, you do make it in a bundt pan, but I could be wrong. Again, I'm not a chef, but you can bake it in a casserole dish or a baking pan of any kind, as long as and it doesn't even have to be 9 inches. I mean, if you want to half the recipe, you know, you can make it in a smaller one. You can, you know, you don't want to make a whole bunch. So.
I'm just curious, Nancy Reagan, having looked at some of her clothing in person, she was such a tiny, small woman. Did you encounter anything as you were researching like food and what she was eating about like dieting and diet culture during the 80s and how she kept her figure, or she just naturally inclined to be tiny?
I don't know. That's actually a really great question. And I feel like I've read so much about, I didn't come across anything about her exercise or diet, which is kind of weird. Because I read some pretty weird stuff about her or kind of went real into it, you know? Yeah. So no, I didn't, but that's super interesting. I would like to know that, actually. But I'm really sorry, I don't know.
All right. Yeah, she was really tiny. I was especially interested because we so much of like jazzercise, so many exercise programs became really popular. And let's see, I'm not sure that we have very many other questions. People were just curious about who the next First Lady you're planning to profile was.
Well, the next live one for you guys it's Abigail Adams, I believe. Abigail Adams. Awesome. So remember the ladies, as she said. So her and, you know, kind of that whole Revolutionary War-ish time sort of thing. So that'll be next. But I never know, might have something else coming up at some point. I don't know. I was actually going to do a Cooking with the Suffragettes program this Wednesday online for a different, but it didn't have enough people sign up for the class. So I won't be doing that, but I will throw it out there that it's ready to go if anybody wants to have me do a cooking, including y'all, about the suffragettes.
Yeah, we'll be into that for sure.
So anyway, but for sure, Abigail Adams will be next for you guys. And hopefully I'll be able to maybe do some of my pre-recorded stuff, kind of get back into that to get to you guys as well. So
do you have a favorite 80s food memory of your own, and just anybody who's watching in the chat who wants to share favorite 80s food memories?
For me, not really. I was born too late in the 80s. Like I was born in 1986. So I'm sure I ate, fruit roll-ups and everything, but I don't remember so much. I do know, I feel like that my parents took me to see Top Gun, but I mean, I was like a baby, so I don't remember it, but I feel like that maybe it was the first movie I ever saw in movie theaters. So no, I don't, but pizza rolls are awesome. I got, I didn't really eat them in the 80s, but
we had this thing when I was a kid that I got because it was advertised on TV that made juice. Like you could mix a juice in it, and it was like an accordion thing. There were commercials on it, TV. I always thought that was really fun. So I remember that. Someone mentioned candy cigarettes, gobstopper candy. So anyways, if you have a favorite 80s food memory that you all want to share with us, you can go to our Facebook page and add it to the conversation. Or if you have some feedback and you try one of these recipes, we would love to hear from you. So, someone mentioned New Coke, of course. So that's a great one. So Sarah, thank you so much. This was really wonderful. Really enjoyed it. And as always, I love chatting and learning about Nancy Reagan because there's so many feelings. People have really great memories. And she's just such an interesting First Lady to delve into. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. And as always, Sarah, people are wowed in the chat that you are able to manage the PowerPoint and the cooking at the same time. So kudos to you, and I hope you have a good cleanup crew there.
Oh, as always. But thanks everybody as well for tuning in. I appreciate it. And thanks for all the nice comments, and thank you.
Thanks so much. And again, you can connect with us via Facebook at National First Ladies Library, or register for other programs in Eventbrite. And you can check out the Cooking with the First Ladies Instagram page to connect with Sarah. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great night.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.